Ever wondered what could happen if that stockpile of ammo you've spent years gathering suddenly placed you in the crosshairs of a federal agency? What if your ability to buy, sell, or even possess rounds for your firearms could be changed by a rule that bypasses Congress altogether? In this video, we'll talk about the ATF's newest regulation set to take effect on April 1st, 2025, how it's transforming the idea of engaging in the business of firearm sales, and why this might be laying the groundwork for an even broader crackdown on ammunition. Some people who know this new rule might say, there's no way that could happen. Fair enough, that new rule doesn't apply to ammo. Not yet, anyway. But it doesn't change the fact that the ATF has modified and remodified its interpretations of existing laws time and again, in ways that caused major waves for responsible gun owners. So today, we're connecting the dots on how a similar reinterpretation aimed at ammo could happen and what it would mean for all of us who believe in the Second Amendment. Back on July 18, 2024, the ATF finalized a rule changing the traditional definition of what it means to be engaged in the business of selling firearms. In earlier years, you might have assumed you only needed a federal firearms license if you sold guns as a main source of income, or if you ran a brick-and-mortar shop. That was the general understanding for a long time. Then came this new approach. If you sell even one firearm and make a profit on it, you may be considered a gun dealer. This doesn't require you to have a big storefront or run hundreds of transactions. Simply taking a gun out of your safe, putting it up for sale, and ending up with a profit can trigger the requirement for you to hold an FFL. That means you'd need to conduct a background check on the buyer and keep strict records, even if you're just a private individual looking to move a firearm you no longer use. What does that have to do with ammo? If the ATF can reclassify selling one gun for profit as being in the business, then logically, one could foresee a time when they say selling ammunition for profit in any quantity requires a separate license or falls under an expanded set of regulations. The Gun Control Act of 1968 gave the federal government regulatory authority over manufacturers, importers, and dealers of firearms and ammo, but individuals have mostly been left alone when it comes to ammunition sales. That's partly because the rules historically focused on large-scale manufacturers or international imports. In the past, if you sold a few boxes of ammunition to a friend, no one batted an eye. But if the ATF decided to redefine what counts as engaging in the business for ammo, they could argue that profit-based ammo sales, even small ones, are subject to federal licensing and oversight. If you think this is just a wild guess, consider how the ATF has redefined or reinterpreted other items in recent years. They took a new stance on bump stocks, reclassifying them as machine guns for legal purposes. They shifted direction on pistol braces, calling them items that can transform pistols into short-barreled rifles under the National Firearms Act. Neither of those reclassifications required a fresh act of Congress. They used a reinterpretation of existing regulations to achieve their goals. When courts step in, it often happens long after people have had to comply or face serious legal jeopardy. If a similar approach is aimed at ammunition, we could see new categories or redefinitions of what qualifies as armor-piercing, sporting, or somehow restricted. That might create a huge wave of unintended felons as soon as the reclassification is announced. One way we could see such a change unfold would be if the ATF decided to look at the sporting purposes test used in ammo regulation. The term sporting is incredibly flexible. It's been applied to firearms imports and certain ammunition types, but it leaves room for the ATF to argue that certain rounds have no legitimate sporting purpose. Perhaps they'll point to the growing use of AR pistols and pistol-caliber carbines. If a certain type of 5.56 or 9mm round is deemed to have capabilities beyond what is considered sporting, the ATF could say, we're reclassifying this as armor-piercing or restricted because it can be used in a handgun platform that can defeat certain protective vests. Whether you believe that is a valid metric or not, that's the argument they tried in 2015 when they came after M855 Green Tip 5.56. It wasn't successful that time, but it showed a willingness to push the envelope. We've also watched the agency respond to executive pressure on ammo imports. Consider how certain Russian calibers or steel core rounds ended up targeted under new or reinterpreted rules, effectively cutting off a supply line for shooters who rely on affordable imports. That kind of restriction might expand if the logic shifts from foreign imports to domestic transactions. Imagine if the ATF declared that selling more than a certain number of rounds per year means you're a dealer, so you now need an FFL. Or that reloaded ammo sold at gun shows requires a special manufacturing license. Most private reloaders aren't set up with federal paperwork, so they could be forced to stop selling or risk prosecution. We're only a few minutes in, but I'm curious. What do you think about these possibilities so far? Does it seem too far-fetched, or does it line up with how the ATF has been operating lately? Sound off in the comments below. That's your chance to join the discussion, and I'll be checking what you all have to say about this. Let's keep going, because there's more to this scenario than just a rule on paper. The new interpretation on firearm sales sets a precedent. The ATF doesn't simply rely on whether you run a full-time business. It hinges on the intent to profit. That language can be picked up and applied to ammo if an administration or a particular set of officials decide they want to cut down on peer-to-peer ammunition sales. They could argue that even though you're not manufacturing brand new ammo on a factory line, you're effectively distributing ammunition to the public if you sell it above cost. And if that's the case, they'd say you need the same oversight as a dealer. Suddenly, your personal stash of surplus 7.62 by 39 that you're flipping for a small profit online is no different from a local shop's new shipments, at least in the eyes of a reworked regulation. This approach could have dramatic consequences. Let's say you try to resell a crate of 223 because you found a big sale months ago and want to cash in on today's higher prices. If the ATF labeled that transaction as engaging in the business, you might face felony charges for operating without an FFL. That's the crux of the issue. We're not talking about large-scale shipping containers or a formal website that sells thousands of rounds daily. We're talking about private individuals who end up in the crosshairs because of how the ATF chooses to interpret business. It's not impossible. If we've learned anything in the last decade, it's that the agency's definitions are fluid. Past episodes hint at how big this impact could be. In 2015, the push to ban M855 caused a surge of panic buying. Shelves cleared out, and people spent crazy amounts of money hoarding every round they could find because they feared it would be the last chance. Although that ban was put on hold, it gave us a glimpse of what can happen when there's a rumor of ammunition being restricted. Imagine a scenario where certain popular calibers, especially those used in AR pistols or semi-auto platforms, are suddenly subject to an armor-piercing tag or forced under new licensing guidelines. Overnight, we could see a buying frenzy, massive price spikes, and law-abiding folks left unsure if their possessions will still be legal in a few months. That confusion alone can deter people from engaging in ordinary activities like trading or selling at gun shows. Another angle involves reloaded ammo. There's a huge community of reloaders who enjoy rolling their own rounds. Some do it for cost savings, some for precision, and some just for the satisfaction of customizing loads. Under normal circumstances, selling reloaded ammo to friends or at small gun shows is mostly unregulated unless you're running a full-scale commercial operation. But if a revised ATF rule says any sale of ammunition for profit requires an FFL, all those small-time reloaders could suddenly be considered unlicensed manufacturers. That's not a small number of people. Think of how many reloading booths you see at big gun shows, or even local events, where folks sell custom loads. If they can't afford a license or simply don't want the federal involvement, they'd have to shut down or risk serious penalties. We should talk about how enforcement might happen. The ATF doesn't have enough resources to knock on every door and see how much ammo you have. That's not how this plays out. Instead, they do it by going after online sellers, checking state or local gun shows, scanning forums or social media for listings, and using sting operations. If they can scare enough people by making examples of a few sellers, that might be enough to push the community to comply. The fear factor can be a significant method of control. It keeps honest folks from engaging in legitimate, harmless transactions because no one wants to risk a federal prison sentence. With the new rule on firearms, we already know the background check part is crucial. If you're considered a dealer, you must run background checks on buyers. Applying that logic to ammo could mean background checks for every purchase, creating a national record of who is buying how many rounds. Keep in mind that all of this could happen without Congress passing a single new law. The same way pistol braces were initially considered fine, then reclassified as creating short-barreled rifles, could apply to ammo. All the ATF needs is a shift in policy, backed by the notion that an existing statute gives them the power to regulate. By the time the courts step in, if they do, people could have already surrendered certain ammo, destroyed certain items, or simply stopped engaging in transactions that once were normal. It may take years for a court to say, this reinterpretation went too far, but that won't help those who gave up their rights or faced legal trouble in the meantime. What about the scale? It's not just a handful of specialized ammo types that could fall under such a rule. We're potentially talking about millions of rounds across multiple calibers, including 9mm, 223, 5.56, 7.62 by 39, 5.45 by 39, and all the common surplus ammo that people love to buy in bulk. Right now, the average gun owner doesn't worry too much about selling a few boxes here or there. They don't think they need an FFL to move ammo around. If the ATF makes it official that any sale for profit qualifies as a business transaction, we'd be looking at a fundamental transformation of how private parties deal with ammunition. People might panic buy in anticipation, creating yet another ammo crisis. Or they might get out of the hobby of trading or selling altogether, leaving fewer options for folks who rely on peer-to-peer transactions for better prices. That begs the question, is there any limit to how far the agency can push administrative interpretations? Historically, the courts have sometimes reined them in. For instance, certain rulings questioned the reclassification of devices without new legislation. But those challenges can move slowly through the legal system, which means the ATF's position often remains in effect while the case is litigated. Given the pace of some lawsuits, we could be waiting years. And if we wind up with a situation where the ATF keeps piling on new rules before the old ones are resolved, the environment for gun owners and ammo sellers becomes confusing and precarious. I don't know about you, but I'm going to stay alert for any sign that the ATF is shifting focus from firearm sales to ammunition sales. But what do you think? Comment below, and please like, share, subscribe, and click on the bell icon for more of these videos. Thanks for watching.